content presented in this podcast is based on real events and may contain graphic descriptions of violence, sensitive topics, and explicit language that may be triggering, offensive, or sensitive subjects to some viewers and listeners. Discretion is advised. The purpose of this podcast is to explore and discuss true crime cases for entertainment and educational purposes only. This podcast does not intend to glorify or sensationalize crime, but rather aims to analyze and understand the complexities of human behavior in the criminal justice system. We encourage listeners to approach this content with empathy, critical thinking, respect for the victims and their families.
Summer 1985, Gladwin County, Michigan. A 13-year-old boy walks out the door and never comes home. The search begins, the town holds its breath, and then the unthinkable. Not only was he murdered, but this wasn't the first time. Behind the quiet towns and tree-lined roads of northern Michigan lurked a man no one suspected. A predator, a manipulator, a killer hiding in plain sight. His name? Ronald Lloyd Bailey. And the crimes he committed were so dark, they would haunt the state for decades. Tonight, we're peering into the depraved mind of a sadistic murderer and the tireless pursuit of justice that finally stopped him. With that being said, it's time to start the show. Let's hit it. Hi, welcome to another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot. I am your host, Winnie Schrader. Man, where do I begin with this story? We're going to dive deep into a case that is heartbreaking as it is horrifying. Now, the book Depraved Obsession, the gripping true story of law enforcement's hunt for a sadistic serial killer by Rod Sadler, pulls back the curtain on a predator, Ronald Lloyd Bailey. This isn't just a story about a twisted mind. This is a story of a monster who preyed on innocent children. Now, in the summer of 1985, 13-year-old Shawn Moore vanished in Gladwin County, Michigan. What followed was every parent's worst nightmare. Now, who was Ronald Lloyd Bailey? Well, he was this predator that rocked Michigan in the 1980s. Now, in 1985, when he kidnapped Shawn Moore in Gladwin County, what started as a missing child case quickly turned into something more disturbing. Now, just 2 weeks later, Bailey was arrested and charged with Shawn's murder and kidnapping, but investigators soon realized this wasn't his first murder. And they find out Bailey has been connected to another young boy just a year earlier. Now, Ron Sadler is a decorated police officer and has the ability to document Michigan serial killer Don Miller's case from a unique law enforcement perspective. For the entire 30 years in law enforcement, Sadler fostered relationships with many of the key people involved in these investigations. So he knows what he's talking about. So I'd like to welcome Rod to the show. Welcome to the show, Rod.
Well, thank you for having me, Winnie. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I know it's been a long time. You've been on my husband's true crime show when he was doing that, but I was waiting for this book to come out because I have never heard of Ronald Lloyd Bailey. And when I saw the book pop up, and I was like, "Who is this?" And I started reading the case. I was like, "Oh my God!" So,
Yeah,
can you give us a little backstory on Ronald Lloyd Bailey and like because I I, I just don't understand how someone could go from just being a kid or whatever to grow up into such a monster. I'm assuming he probably had some abuse or trauma in his childhood. But can you give us a little backstory on him so we can kind of get an understanding of maybe why he did what he did?
sure, absolutely. Ronald Bailey actually lived in the Detroit area. Um,
Hmm.
his victim, Shawn Moore, was found in northern Michigan in Gladwin County, which is 100 miles or more away from the Detroit area. But Ron Bailey, really, he didn't suffer, at least through my research. I didn't find any evidence that he was abused at all, um, psychologically or physically, by his parents or his home life. I think
Okay.
what happened with Ron Bailey is that when he reached puberty and he began to have those feelings of desire, sexual desire, he was torn between heterosexuality and homosexuality. And
Mhm.
he discovered through some encounters with others that he enjoyed the homosexuality part. Um,
Okay.
and he also experienced some depravity, if you will, in some of the things that he explored with some other kids, and apparently a trucker at some point, and that was erotic asphyxiation. And
Okay.
if your listeners don't know what that is, it's basically putting some sort of ligature around your neck and cutting off the oxygen supply to your brain. Supposedly gives you a more erotic experience, and that's
Yeah.
what Ron Bailey enjoyed.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've seen kind of a pattern like that when it comes to, especially in that time period, the 70s and 80s. Gay men, they were so shunned and shamed and put, everything had to be behind closed doors. Jeffrey Dahmer, for example, going through puberty, trying to understand his homosexuality, and that time period, homosexuality was not accepted. I mean,
It
you
wasn't.
had to be. Yeah. So I mean, I've almost seen a pattern, like, in those time periods, that's when it's almost like that sadistic, part of their personality started to flourish because it was probably a lot of self-hate, shame, all that stuff when it came to being a homosexual in that time period. So, I'm my assumption, my opinion, that probably played a huge part in why he maybe did what he did.
Oh, I think you're right. I think you're right. I think that it wasn't spoke of freely back in the mid '80s, and
Mhm.
I think it became more prevalent maybe when the AIDS epidemic hit. Um, and I think people were more willing to, over time, come out, if you will.
Mhm.
It's a very difficult subject to write about, to talk about,
Yeah.
for anybody. And I think that Ron Bailey, he struggled with that. He did a very good job of keeping his sexual preference and his lifestyle very confidential to
Yeah.
anyone. And and I think that you're right. I think that that probably helped contribute to some of the things that he learned and that he knew he had to keep secret.
Right. So, now, did he have any type of, I mean, obviously he didn't have really, there's no documentation or evidence that he was abused. So going through puberty and kind of sexually experimenting with other boys, uh, when did that sadistic side of him start? Did he start what did it come at, like, did it start with that erotic asphyxiation and kind of grew from there to
No,
more
I
depravity?
think I think the erotic asphyxiation came a little bit later. Um,
Okay.
Ron Bailey's initial crimes, if you will, as a youth, began when he was about 13.
Okay.
He would kidnap younger boys, um, pretty much the same MO that he used throughout his criminal career.
Wow,
He
like
would
at
kidnap,
13?
yeah, he would kidnap young boys, take them out, sexually assault them, threaten them that if they told anyone, that their family would be killed or they'd be killed. And at one point, when he turned 16, He had kidnapped a young boy, and after sexually assaulting him, he literally choked him to the point of unconsciousness and left him for dead. He thought that he was dead, threw his body in the bushes, and that was actually the catalyst, if you will, for him to enter the criminal justice system. That particular incident, he was charged with kidnapping, sexual assault, and attempted murder. What happened was that when he went to court, the judge was faced with a dilemma, and that dilemma was, do I commit Ron Bailey because he's 16 years old? Under Michigan law, he can be charged as an adult. Do I
Hmm.
commit him to the Michigan prison system where he'll get no help? Or do I put him on probation and confine him into a psychiatric institution where he will get help? And the
Hmm.
judge felt that Plan B was the better plan. And so Ron
Okay.
Bailey received 5 years of probation at that point, at the age of 16. And he was committed to what was known back then as the Hawthorne Center. It was a
Okay.
psychiatric hospital for youth.
Okay. And was it kind of run like a prison? Like they couldn't leave? It was just kind of this almost like a
I would say I would say not run like a prison, but definitely he was confined there, and
okay.
he went through intense counseling sessions with his family and with his psychiatrist, who played
Okay.
an integral part in the eventual outcome of Ron Bailey's life. Dr. Jose
Oh,
Tombo, he was the treating psychiatrist. And Ron Bailey was eventually moved from the Hawthorne Center um, into the Northville Regional Psychiatric Hospital, which is for adults, a psychiatric
okay.
hospital for adults. But at that point, he built up his trust with his doctor, and his doctor would occasionally check him out, take him out into the community. Ron Bailey, being over 18, had the ability to check himself out, we've learned, and go to work at a job, um, go visit his family on the weekends, things like that. And
Mhm.
that really adds to some suspicion of maybe about some later crimes that occurred. But
Oh,
yeah, but basically, all in all, Ron Bailey he was allowed to leave the Northville Regional Psychiatric Hospital as an adult, and then in 1980, he was eventually released from there, though he was still on probation for the criminal charges, and
okay.
that's when he actually left the state for a short period of time. He moved to Florida for 3 years.
Okay. Now that is bizarre to me that he could just
Yeah, well, what happened was he decided that he wanted to go to Florida, because he
uh
wanted to start anew. He wanted to be able to go out and do the things that he wanted to do without suspicion and things like that, go out fishing and things like that. That's what he told his parents. Um,
Yeah.
Looking back, I think in hindsight, law enforcement realized he was probably just moving to new hunting ground,
Yeah.
because once he moved to Florida, um, he began right where he left off, seducing
Okay.
young children, um, getting them drunk, molesting them, things like that.
Okay. So now, did he ever have encounters with grown gay men, or was his focus solely on children?
He did have some. He did have some encounters with young gay men, um,
Okay.
but I think that his preference clearly was pedophilia. There's no question
Mhm.
about that. That's
Right.
uh, that's what all of his criminal charges are based upon. And
Okay.
I just don't think that there's any question that Ron Bailey is a sadistic pedophilia serial killer. There's just no question.
So there's probably I mean, Were there any cases in Florida of missing children that he could possibly be tied to or he was suspected in any of those cases while he was living there?
Great question. I can tell you that there has been some suspicion that there may
Mhm.
be some cases that he was tied to in Florida, although I haven't been able to prove that. Um, there's also some suspicion that he may have been involved in a case in Sylvania, Ohio. Um, I
Okay.
haven't been able to prove that, although I did do a podcast recently with uh, another podcaster who is a researcher into cold cases in Ohio. And so he has
Okay.
the information. Hopefully, he's able to follow up on those.
Oh, for
And then,
sure.
of course, there's some suspicion, and I will call it nothing more than suspicion at this point, that Ron Bailey, in some way, may have been involved in um, what has been called the Oakland County child killings here in Michigan in the mid 70s. And the Oakland County
Oh,
child killings involved the murders of four very young teenagers over a period of about 18 months in Michigan's Oakland County. To this day, those cases remain unsolved. There has been
okay.
suspicion that it was either one or a group of people committing those crimes. The children were held for several days, if not a week or two, before their bodies were found. And so it's a case that's gone on uh, almost 50 years now, and those four
Wow.
cases are still unsolved. At the time of those cases, Ron Bailey would have been around 16 years old, and the
Okay.
suspicion has always been, um, from the law enforcement perspective, that the whoever was doing these crimes was using someone who looked very young to lure the kids in, where they could be eventually kidnapped. And
Right.
so and so there is some suspicion on that. Nothing positive to prove that there was any involvement on Ron Bailey's part, but the suspicion I think has always been there.
Right. He's kind of like that hiding in plain sight, this monster. You don't
Well,
suspect a 16-year-old teenage boy to be kidnapping young boys, sexually assaulting them and choking them out. I mean, it doesn't cross your mind. And
exactly, and you're exactly
oh,
right. He was hiding in plain sight for 15 years. At his trial, he admitted that he had kidnapped upwards of 15 boys over the last
oh,
13 years.
oh, that's
And two of
awful.
those, yeah, and two of those he murdered. There's no question
Right.
about it.
Okay.
Shawn
Well,
Moore and Kenny Myers.
okay. So yeah, let's kind of talk about Shawn Moore. So in August of '85, he went out for, I'm assuming probably a couple last days before school was back in session, and it's the end of August and you want to get your last summer days in, and he left the house and never came home.
Yeah,
So,
it was actually a Labor Day weekend in 1985, and
okay.
he lived with his parents just outside Brighton, Michigan, which is down near Ann Arbor, between Ann Arbor and oh, it's actually north of Ann Arbor, between Ann Arbor and Howell, Michigan, and
Okay.
lived with his folks. His older brother, who was 13 years old, in law school, also lived there, and Sean and his dad were going out to do lawn work. It was just before school was to start. He was going to be in the 8th grade, and the lawnmower broke down, and it was a hot day. Sean just said, "Hey, can I ride my bike up a mile to the pump and pantry, a little convenience store, gas station about a mile away?" And his dad gave
Okay.
him permission. Said, "Make sure that you're not gone long. We're all going. We're going to have an early dinner, and we're going to go see a movie tonight." Sean left on his bike. His neighbors saw him riding up to the pump and pantry. They passed him on his bike. There were several witnesses that saw him at the pump and pantry, including, sadly, Ronald Lloyd Bailey. Ronald Lloyd Bailey was there buying a pack of cigarettes. He spotted Shawn Moore, young, 13 years old, 14 years old, with blonde hair, blue eyes, and he waited for Shawn to leave. He followed him down the service road next to the highway. It's called Whitmore Lake Road. And
Mhm.
he pulled up behind Shawn and he yelled uh, something to the effect of wanting directions somewhere. And Shawn had been warned by his parents because southeastern Michigan was still on edge from the Oakland County child killings just 8 years earlier. So his
Okay.
parents had talked to him about stranger danger, and Shawn assured them that he would fight if anybody ever tried to grab him. Well, as Ron Bailey was chasing him down, so to speak, while he was on his bike, he caught up to him, forced him from his bike, forced him back to his Jeep, and took off. Luckily, there were some witnesses on the highway and a college student on Whitmore Lake Road that witnessed it also. And
Okay.
they quickly notified authorities and began the investigation into searching for Shawn.
That's nuts. I mean, just to think, just in that split second, he chose to completely, uh, uh, just take this kid's life,
Yeah,
and just I mean, there was no thought process in it or any he just looked at the kid and said, "That kid's mine. I'm taking him." And that is so scary, especially as a parent, to know that people can do that. But
yeah.
yeah, just nothing. He just saw a kid and he put his target on him, and unfortunately, the outcome was not great. So he took he took Sean, and I'm assuming off into some remote area and assaulted and did what he did to Sean.
He
Um,
did. He did. Actually, he ended up in Gladwin County in northern Michigan. His
okay.
girlfriend's cabin was up there. His
Oh,
girlfriend's family's cabin, and that's
okay.
where he took Shawn, um, sexually assaulted him over a day or two, and then eventually choked him to death, strangled
So he
him.
kept him. So it's not like he just assaulted, kill, and then left. I mean, he would have these kids for a day or two and almost like torturing these kids.
In
Um,
it exactly, in Sean's case, that's exactly what happened.
oh,
They did tie him to an earlier murder a year before that, the murder of Kenny
okay,
Myers in Ferndale, Michigan, which is a Detroit suburb, much like
okay,
Brighton is. And in that case, he had used the same method of operation. He
okay.
forced Kenny Myers from his bike and into his car. He ended up 20 miles away in a sort of a secluded park that ran through several counties in southeastern Michigan, and
Uh-huh.
they found Kenny Myers' body the next day. Um,
Uh, uh,
and basically the same method of operation. Kenny Myers was sexually assaulted and he was strangled by Ron Bailey.
Now, was there any type of clues? Did he leave like any type of trademark or anything to say, okay, I think we're seeing a pattern with the same killer? Because when you think, when you strangle somebody and sexually assault, I mean, there's really no uh triggering things to say, I know exactly who did this. Did he leave any type of clues or was there DNA evidence? Because I know DNA wasn't really a thing back then, but how did they tie him to the case a year earlier and possibly further cases that you have been currently looking into?
Sure. Well, what happened was Kenny Myers' case went cold. There was
Okay.
also another abduction a month before Kenny Myers was abducted uh, in Dearborn Heights. A young man or a young teen was kidnapped and sexually assaulted. That case had also gone cold. So you have a kidnapping and then you have a kidnapping and murder a month apart. Both cases not solved. The next year, Shawn Moore gets kidnapped in Brighton. Um,
Mhm.
in an unprecedented, and I hate that. I'm just going to tell you right now, I hate that term, unprecedented, because we heard it so much during COVID. Uh,
I know.
but in an unprecedented turn of events, local, state, and federal authorities came together, formed a task force, and began to share information, which was literally unheard of back
Yep.
then, almost unheard of. Uh, Law enforcement agencies held information very close, and they didn't share it a lot. So in this case,
Mhm.
the state police um, were leading this task force, and they said the lieutenant that got up in front of the task force the day after the kidnapping, he said, "I don't care who you are. I don't care how long you've been in law enforcement. If you have an idea on what's going on, I want to hear it." And so there
Right.
was this camaraderie, which really, in an effort to find Sean safe, because nobody knew where he was. And so, uh, as the state police worked with the American Motors Corporation, they had determined that the vehicle that was involved in Sean's kidnapping was a Jeep, which
Okay.
was manufactured by AMC back then. And so they checked with AMC. AMC gave them a list of all the Jeep owners in the Oakland County area, Livingston County area, Southeast Michigan, basically. And so the
Okay.
state police began to go through those vehicle identification numbers, and they'd have to run them through lean, and they'd have to get the owner's name, and they'd go and talk to the owner and see if they had an alibi. Ron Bailey's name came up, and they eventually went and talked to Ron Bailey. And Ron Bailey said, "No," he said, I was out of town that weekend. I was up in
Okay.
Caseville, Michigan, up in Michigan's thumb area. I was up there
Mhm.
fishing with my friend." And so they took his statement, and they went on to interview more people. Well, that night, the Livonia police contacted the task force, and they said, "Hey, we had a guy here in Livonia, and this is exactly what his MO is. The same MO that happened in the Shawn Moore kidnapping. You really
Okay.
should go talk to this guy. His name's Ron Bailey." So they hunt down Ron Bailey that night. The FBI does, and they find him. And they said, "Where were you?" And the weekend of Labor Day. And he said, "Well,
Mhm.
I was up in Caseville, Michigan, fishing with my friend." Well, what Ron Bailey didn't anticipate was that they interviewed his friend, and his friend said he wasn't
Oh.
in Caseville with me. And so they had, yeah, so they had enough to
Uh,
hold him at that point. So
I
they
see.
took him in, and they set up a lineup with some of the witnesses. And they also looked at all the property that he had, in his wallet and such. Well,
Mhm.
none of the witnesses could pick him out that night.
Okay.
And so police didn't have enough to hold him. So they released him, but they put him under surveillance. There was a team following him. The next day, they looked at some of the property that had been in his wallet, and there was a small receipt for a towing company. And so they
Oh, okay.
contacted the towing company. The towing company basically said, "Yeah, we pulled him out of a ditch. He was with a girl, and I remember who the girl was." And they gave the police the girlfriend's name. So they went and talked to
Oh.
the girlfriend and said, "Where was Ron Bailey that particular weekend?" She said, "Oh, he was up in Gladwin County at our family cabin." Police knew immediately that's where Sean's body would be found. And
Oh, wow.
so that's when they moved the search up to Gladwin County. At the same time, as soon as Ron Bailey was released because the witnesses couldn't pick him out, he fled to Florida. And
Oh.
the surveillance team actually followed him to Florida.
Oh,
And
good. So it's
yeah,
not like
and
he was in the wind. Okay.
no, no, and when they moved in to arrest him at a trailer
Mhm.
that he was staying in, he had fled. And that resulted in one of the largest manhunts in Florida history in Marion County for 2 or 3 days. They had police cars. They had narrowed it down to about a 10 square mile area, and they had police cars like every 500 feet or so, and around this entire area. And they
Wow.
searched for him for 3 days until he finally gave up. He'd been eaten alive by mosquitoes and bugs, and he was hungry, and he was all scraped up from the swamps and things. And so we finally said, he came out Saturday night at one of the checkpoints. He said, "My name's Ron Bailey. I'm tired. I'm hungry. I give up."
Have you ever felt like something or someone was trying to tell you something? That inner nudge, that quiet whisper from the universe, with intuition sharpened by years of spiritual connection and a deep-rooted gift. Winnie Schrader delivers readings that are compassionate, insightful, and shockingly accurate. Whether you're facing a crossroads healing from heartache, or just curious what the cards reveal, Winnie creates a safe, sacred space to explore your journey. This isn't fortune cookie fluff. This is honest, intuitive guidance from someone who's helped hundreds find clarity, closure, and confidence. If you've been waiting for a sign, this is it. Book your session now at lovelotustarot.com and take control of your journey. That's lovelotustarot.com. Winnie's sessions are personal, powerful, and often life-changing. That's lovelotustarot.com.
And so he was brought back to Michigan and charged in Shawn Moore's death.
Wow. Oh gosh. Yeah, I was gonna say, where was he hiding now? He's lucky he didn't get alligators after him, sitting in swamps and
Yeah, yeah. He was down
wow.
south of Ocala, Florida, in a little town called Bellevue, Florida.
Okay.
And it's the same place that he had lived when he lived there in the early 80s. He fled right back there. And the surveillance team, the fun part of this whole I say fun part, the interesting part of this whole part where he flees to Florida is he jumps on a commercial airline at Detroit's Metro Airport. The police, they have a connection with Tom Monahan, who owned Domino's Pizza and the Detroit Tigers. Tom Monahan loaned them his personal jet, and they tailed the airline down to Florida, and that's how they got down there. Yeah,
Wow.
it was really
Whoa, that's like a
interesting.
group effort, man.
Yeah,
Teamwork.
yeah.
You get
It was very
Domino's.
impressive. Yeah,
Yeah, I wouldn't expect. Yeah, the guy who owns Domino's and the Detroit Tigers. Here, use my plane.
yeah, that's
Go
exactly
get
what
this
happened.
guy.
Yeah,
Wow. Well, I mean, that is good law enforcement. Following the trails, listening to witnesses. Because I've come across a lot of cases where a lot of police departments they get honed into one person and they won't listen to other people's what they have to say, what they witnessed. And
exactly.
this is being open-minded and listening to people and putting the pieces together. Unfortunately, 2 kids had lost their life and probably more, but he got caught, and that's the important thing. So, so he gives up. He's got the white flag. So they fly him back to Michigan, and obviously he's charged. So trial happens. Now, during
Yes.
the trial, what did he try it? Was there any type of insanity thing going on because of having his psychiatric care in his teens? Did he try and use that as a kind of like a mental illness disorder so he can plead insanity? Or what was the trial like for him?
Yeah, his defense attorneys, interestingly enough, could not find any psychiatrists or psychologists in the Detroit area that would take the case. Nobody wanted it. Nobody wanted to touch that case because it involved the murders of children, and
Mhm.
I'm sure they feared it would probably ruin their careers. And so
Wow.
there was a doctor in the Detroit area who reached out to them. He was a very what's the term I'm looking for? Flamboyant, very well known. He had
Mhm.
commercials that ran constantly in the Detroit area about how he
Okay.
can help people. And so he was a kind of a local celebrity, if you will. So he
Yep.
reaches out. He says, "I'll take the case." At the same
Okay.
time, Dr. Tombo, Ron Bailey's psychiatrist, contacts the defense attorneys and
Okay.
says, I can meet you, but I can only meet you at your office, and it has to be after 8 o'clock at night. It's got to be at night, which they thought was a little weird. And
Yeah.
so they had this clandestine meeting with Ron Bailey's psychiatrist.
Okay.
And he says, I can give you everything that you need to show Ron Bailey was insane. I've got all the charts, all his medical records. I can show you, or I can prove that he was insane at the time he did these 2 murders. He said, but the caveat is you cannot bring up the fact that I checked him out of the hospital and took him over into Canada to the horse races. Well, Ron Bailey's dad was sitting there. And what the defense attorneys didn't know was that Ron Bailey had told his dad he'd been sexually assaulted by his doctor. And his dad didn't believe him. But when the doctor said, you can't bring up the fact that I checked him out of the psychiatric hospital and took him to Windsor, Canada to the horse races, his dad exploded. His dad was going to kill the doctor right there in the attorney's office. And
Wow.
Ray Kassar and Chuck Murphy, the 2 attorneys, they stood up and had to come between the 2 of them and said, "This is not the time or the place. We'll work this out."
Right.
And Tombo left, and at that point they knew we'll never see him again. He'll never testify for us, and they could
Wow.
never find him to subpoena him to testify about this sexual relationship that he had with Ron Bailey. Ron Bailey claimed that the relationship was forced upon him. He was forced into this gay relationship with Dr. Tombo.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we've found that it was more of a consensual relationship because Ron Bailey figured, hey, if I do this, then I get that. You scratch
Right.
my back, I'll scratch yours. And so that's why he got, free gratis to check himself out, to get a job, things like that from the psychiatric hospital. It was a whole
Okay.
sordid affair. And even though they couldn't find Dr. Tombo to have him testify in Ron Bailey's trial,
Mm-hmm.
uh, the fact that they couldn't find him, he still pled insanity. And they
Okay.
brought in this very high profile local celebrity doctor, and his testimony was, let's just say, disjointed and confusing. And of
Okay.
course, in contrast to that, you have the state psychiatrists who come in, and psychologists, and testify on the state's behalf. Very professional, very easy to understand. And the jury
Mm-hmm.
didn't buy the defense's doctor's testimony. They didn't buy it at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. I don't. He sounds more like a snake oil salesman than a doctor.
Well,
Uh.
I got to tell you, it's funny you mentioned that, because I found out in my research that after that trial, that particular doctor moved to California,
Okay.
that he was eventually arrested for giving out prescription fraud, giving out thousands and thousands and thousands of illegal prescriptions. He was arrested by the DEA and did 10 years in prison.
Wow.
And honestly, I think he's still alive uh,
Ooh.
out
Have
there
to
in
look him
California.
up.
He's in his low 90s, if he is.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
Wow.
that was the kind of guy that he was. It was just a very sordid affair. Um,
Right.
but law enforcement did an excellent job, um,
Right.
just an excellent job. And the beauty of this whole case, not to belabor this, but you had two families. You had the Moore family and you had Kenny Myers' family. And both of those families turned their tragedy into something positive. They formed organizations to help educate young kids and parents on the dangers of strangers, um,
Good.
and how to avoid that situation, what to do if you get caught in that situation. And so there was positive things that came out of this.
Good.
And maybe some of the other positive stuff down the road will be the solving of some other uh, cases, some cold cases. Maybe
Right.
this book will be the catalyst for that.
Hopefully, yeah, because I mean, I can't imagine being a parent and, you know, having that not knowing where your child is. Are they alive? Are they dead? Where are they? Are they hurt? Just not knowing it has to be just torture. It's almost like you would rather know if they were dead or not than not knowing. Um, you know,
Exactly.
and and taking something positive, like you said, and educating people and children on the dangers of things, especially in today's age with social media. It's very prominent of predators reaching out to kids on Instagram and TikTok and Twitter and all that stuff, or X if you want to call it.
Yeah.
But yeah, the dangers of that alone is really scary. So it's good to educate kids, especially the younger they are, and you just kind of keep instilling that into them as they grow up. Hopefully, something good will come of that and they're more aware of what's going on in their surroundings. But I remember back in the 80s how, the Adam Walsh case,
Oh,
how it
yeah.
had the code Adam now at the stores. When you go to the stores and you see that blue sticker on their door that says code Adam, that's because of the Adam Walsh case. He was kidnapped from Sears store at a mall in Hollywood, Florida, and he was found dead about a week later, I think it was.
Yeah.
But something like that. And I remember back in the 80s, you always worried about the guy in the van with no windows and
Oh, yeah.
things like
Yeah.
it instilled fear into kids. I mean, we were literally like terrified if anybody looked at us where our car was, driving slowly by us. We'd be like, "Oh, gotta turn this way on my bike. I'm jetting through
Yeah.
it here." But yeah, it's sad to know that these two kids, were victims, but it got him caught. Now, did he? What was his sentence? Because I'm assuming he was found guilty. Um, so what was kind of the outcome of his trial?
Well, in addition to the two murder cases, they also charged him in the abduction a month before Kenny Myers'
Okay.
abduction. So he was charged with abduction, sexual assault, and murder in the Shawn Moore and Kenny Myers cases, and then with abduction and kidnapping and sexual assault in that third case. So once he was convicted by a jury in the Shawn Moore case.
Okay.
He was then immediately tried, and that was in Michigan's Livingston County, which is
Okay.
southeast Michigan. And then he was tried in Wayne County, which is the Detroit area, which is where Kenny Myers was kidnapped in Ferndale. That was
Okay.
in Wayne County. And after those two convictions, the prosecutor decided to drop the abduction charges from that one before Kenny Myers. They figured he's already got two life sentences without parole in the Michigan prison system. It would simply be cumulative, wouldn't serve any purpose at all. And so that third kidnapping case was eventually dismissed. Actually, that was
Okay.
immediately following the conviction in the Kenny Myers case. Incidentally, he was convicted by a jury in Shawn Moore's case. He chose to have a bench trial simply in front of the judge with no jury. in the Kenny Myers case, and it took the judge about 15 minutes uh, from the time that the cases or that the proofs were closed for him to come to his decision, and he simply had to go into the back and write out some notes. So
Okay.
yeah,
Wow. It's Yeah, I'm glad he was caught because I think this is the type of person that I don't think can be rehabilitated. I mean, it's just part of his genetic code. It's just who he is. He's a monster, needs to be locked and put away. There's, and I I I can't believe how he was his first being 16, being caught and put in that psychiatric facility. The leniency that they gave him for the reason why he went in there in the first place is baffling to me. I would make sure that kid would not be around anybody other than adults or kids his age and very closely monitor because it's not normal for a 13-year-old boy or a 16-year-old boy to abduct and sexually assault peers.
I had a guy reach out to me. This always happens. People reach out to me after the book is published.
Mhm,
But a guy reached out to me, and I'm certain it was very, very difficult for him to do this. But
mhm.
he sent me an email and he said, I was one of Ron Bailey's best friends back when he was like
Oh,
13. And he said
okay.
we would experiment on each other. Um, we had this little thing that we did. We called it tickling. And I thought that was interesting because Ron Bailey used that term a lot in his trial
Oh,
and testimony. That's what
okay.
he would do with his victims. They would tickle each other,
Okay.
obviously to get aroused.
Mhm.
But anyway, this guy reached out to me, and I really don't know what the purpose of that was, but I did appreciate the fact that he did do that, and
Mhm.
clearly he was gay. Um, don't really care about that,
Yeah.
um, but it took a lot of courage for him to do that, and it kind of
Yeah.
substantiated um, the things that I had the things that I had discovered in my research for this book, that in fact did go on.
Yeah. And that might be very well why he reached out to you just to say, hey, just kind of corroborating what's in your book and just say, you know, this is how it was when he was 13. We experimented. You know, did he elaborate at all, seeing maybe even some sadistic tendencies when he experimented with Ron, or was it just kind of fun, kind of this is what we would do. We would kiss, we would do this. Or did he mention anything that kind of seemed a little off for his age?
That's a great question because that's the first thing I asked him. I said, "Did you guys
Okay.
experience anything with bondage or sadism or anything like that?" And he said, "No." He said, "It was just,
Okay.
we were young enough where it was just, we would take off our clothes and things like that."
Mhm.
So uh, I would say no at that point. I think that probably came maybe between that relationship with his best friend and the point where he ended up kidnapping that teenager when he was 16 years old, when he
Wow.
was first charged criminally. It's a very, very difficult subject to talk about. It's a very, very
Yeah.
difficult subject to write about because you wanna give the families that respect. But there's also lingering questions out there that I
Right.
think, that basically because I was a law enforcement officer for 30 years, um, that unknown that I think needs to be answered. And
Yeah.
that's the reason that I wrote this book.
Yeah, the book now we're been talking about is Depraved Obsession, the gripping true story of law enforcement's hunt for a sadistic serial killer. Rod Sadler is our guest tonight. Thank you so much, Rod, for coming on. This is a really interesting case, and especially for it being Pride Month. You know, look at some of the gay history and what gay people had to go through, and how you could see some of these cases and how that played a part. Not saying that they were the reason why they did it is because they were gay. It's
Oh no.
because of society and how they shunned that group of people to the point where they felt so encapsulated and closed in that they couldn't be themselves. There was a lot of gay men that would marry women and have families and just was a closeted gay man, but I can't imagine what that would do to somebody's psyche to have to squash a part of yourself to be able to be accepted in society. And
Exactly.
the shame and the self-hating and all that stuff, how that plays a huge part in it, and how that can mold and create monsters like this. So I'm glad that cases like this are getting written about and people are reading about them, because it's like, okay, what didn't we learn then that we can change now? So
Right.
we don't have issues like that. But yeah, thank you so much. The book link will be in today's description. Please rate and review these books. It helps them get seen more. And I will also put a link to your author's page as well, because you have a good assortment of books, and we'll definitely have to have you back on. You are one of those true crime authors that you're just the gift that keeps on giving, Rod.
Oh, thank
And
you.
I love it. You just keep pumping out books, and I would love to have you on again. Thank you guys so much, and I hope to see you all next week.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot. And until our next case, my armchair detectives, stay safe, stay vigilant, and stay aware. I'll see you right here next week on Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot.